Hey everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan from What Culture, joined today by Josh Brown.
Hello, Ewan.
Hello, Josh, because we've got some interesting Netflix-related news today, and something that I wasn't personally expecting.
Nope.
But something that I wasn't expecting, but I'm really excited about because I didn't think it would actually happen, and it pertains to Mindhunter, doesn't it, Josh?
It certainly does. This has come by way of Small Screen, who have said that their sources are indicating that talks for Mindhunter Season 3 is back on Netflix. David Fincher has apparently expressed interest. They're trying to figure something out. And ultimately, this could mean that we have a Mindhunter Season 3 sooner rather than later. Sadly, we had to bring you guys the news last year that they were essentially cutting ties with the show. It was going on indefinite hold. Netflix kind of came out and said, we might do a season further on down the line, but don't expect anything for about 5 years or so. But according to Small Screen, like I said, this doesn't seem to be the case. Their sources said, and I quote, "All I can really tell you about Mindhunter is that conversations between Netflix and Fincher are ongoing. They are discussing the possibility of bringing the show back for a third season. It's still very early days, but Fincher sounds more upbeat about the project." End quote. Before, it went off the air, Fincher was kind of talking about how big his plans were for the show, which is why it stung so much. He was talking about the story spanning decades, following these characters and exploring a bunch of serial killers that we never got. But I'm going to stop rambling for a second and let you tell me how excited you might be about the potential of more from Mindhunter.
Yeah, I'm massively excited about this because I loved Mindhunter and I love David Fincher, and I'm really interested in true crime and all the creepy kind of serial killers of the night. I don't know if you know, Josh, there was a lot of serial killers in the 1970s, and they were all really disturbing.
Yeah.
The 70s is my favorite decade history-wise because bloody Watergate and film and everything. The 70s are really interesting. People who say the 70s are boring don't know what the 70s were like. They're really interesting. And one thing, again, obviously, part of what makes this news so exciting is that not only did we have a bunch of, plot threads that were kind of left unanswered. I mean, spoilers for the ending of Mindhunter Season 2 here, but you'll recall that at the end of that season, Trench's kind of family basically collapses after his son does something slightly disturbing or gets caught up in some disturbing events. And obviously, the actual story of how the FBI kind of started its profiling methods to profile serial killers. That is just an inherently interesting topic, and I thought that Mindhunter worked best, personally, when it wasn't doing the full serial killer impressions every now and then. We had the Charles Manson episode in the second season as well, and then obviously, we had Ed Kemper and the other characters. But again, that's a big draw for people because, Fincher mentioned last year, I believe, that he was looking to introduce John Wayne Gacy on the show and other kind of notorious killers of the era as well. So yeah, it's one of those shows where I think, Fincher has always shown a talent for kind of tackling that kind of history. I mean, Zodiac is one of my favorite films ever. I think that is just an absolutely brilliant approximation of like 70s era San Francisco and, how one really creepy dude can just completely define an era and a setting for people. And I just can't wait to see more of that, hopefully, if it all comes together. And plus, we need to see more of Jonathan Groff being a really creepy, sleazy, not nice protagonist, because he gets so absorbed in these killers. And that in itself is a really interesting commentary on the way we consume true crime. But I realize I'm completely rambling right now. Josh, what are your thoughts as well?
It's all good stuff because I think Mindhunter, perhaps more than any other show that Netflix has, which there are a lot of, it just is so rich and its characters are so complex and interesting, and they change. Season 2, like you mentioned there, the back half of Season 2 especially, dove into some really surprising topics, at least compared to how the first season was marketed as this kind of serial killer interrogation. Who are we going to have on this week? How are they going to be portrayed? It jumped into some really fascinating aspects of the characters and took them down some really dark paths in a lot of ways. But I think, you mentioned that Fincher, obviously, he has a huge creative hand in the series, and I do think that's partly why the show was initially going to go on hiatus, because Season 2, for all intents and purposes, no matter how well the end product turned out, that just sounded like hell to get off the ground. Originally, they had a bunch of scripts. Fincher came in, was like, no, these aren't good. They tossed them all out. The production took a long time to get in flow. Fincher, in general, is a perfectionist when it comes to the movies, and that is obviously translated over to a TV show, which requires more time because there's more hours of footage being shot, more episodes need to be mapped out, a story needs to be more intricately detailed. So I wonder how much of that burnout, just contributed to the idea of putting this on hold. and I guess he must have just got the spark back. Netflix are interested in bringing back a show, which is quite like unique for them. Usually they are operating by this rule, this unwritten rule.
2 seasons and you're out.
2 seasons, 3 seasons, and then you're done, no matter how popular you are, because ultimately they were working off a model that new shows and new hype drives subscribers, and older shows, legacy shows, aren't that important. But I wonder whether they're beginning to reconsider that stance at the moment, which, I think ultimately would be smart, because we've had a lot of casualties over the past few years when it comes to great shows that Netflix have binned off that people are a bit distraught about, and ultimately Mindhunter was one of those, but hopefully we get a season 3 pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, if it does come back, it ends the curse of all the TV shows that I got invested in over the 2010s coming to a premature end, or never getting the kind of love and recognition they needed to actually continue. Like, if Brian Fuller comes out the nenext day and is like, hey, we're going to bring back Hannibal as well, I mean, this will just be the best kind of week ever, because they should bring back Hannibal, because that is a great show. But yeah, I mean, in general, the Netflix model has always been deeply frustrating for me, and I feel as though it's, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, it's slightly disingenuous on Netflix's behalf to expect audiences to invest in a show when the likelihood is it's going to come to an end at like a premature end at that. Obviously every single TV show will eventually conclude unless you're The Simpsons, and when you have that kind of premature ending as well, it leaves a lot of resentment and frustration from the fans. So if this signals a shift away from that potentially, I think that would be really good. And I mean, it's interesting to figure out Netflix's motivation series, or you mentioned earlier on the Legacy series and the fact that, certain shows have continued while others have been kind of left to the wayside. Are there any other kind of shows you could maybe think they'd be potentially disgusting about bringing back? I think Glow was another one that we all loved and was kind of shocked about to have that kind of come to an end. So lots of different shows that are in Netflix's library that I think a lot of fans will now be questioning and raising the idea of, well, could we get them back?
Yeah, totally. I think Glow is the big one. That was the one that seemed to shock everyone, and I know there was a bunch of people we work with who were extremely gutted that went off the air. But I think the thing is with Netflix, even though they have cancelled a lot of shows, I think they have kind of shown, not just with this, but in the past, that they are open to exploring bringing them back in one form or another, whether it's a one-off movie, whether it's a one-off season, whether it's, bringing them back properly. I mean, there were huge gaps between Arrested Development season 4 and season 5, and obviously that had a lot to do with the cast, difficulty bringing them together, but they have been, and even when they were talking about Mindhunter, they said, we'll revisit in maybe 5 years' time. So I feel like, at least when Netflix cancels something, for as guttering as it might be, there's always the chance that they might bring something back in a way that you don't really have in your head when one of the regular networks cancels something, And I think with Fincher especially, he recently did sign I think it was a 4-year contract with Netflix to create projects, whether that be movies or TV. Obviously, Mank was a collaboration with the studio. His upcoming movie called The Killer is a collaboration with the studio. And I wonder whether, in between all that, being able to work on these movies in between Mindhunter has kind of made him think, what, maybe now's the time, I've made a few movies and I want to kind of finish this unfinished business. And whether or not it comes back to take us into the 90s, into the 2000s like he was teasing, or whether it's just coming back for one final season to kind of wrap things up in a way that is more satisfying and a little bit more conclusive.
That is an unwitting pun, Josh Brown, given all the BTK stuff
Oh,
in season 2.
Yeah, very
there
true.
You go.
Not intentional.
But yeah. The Jim Carrey, you're telling me there's a chance gift continues to give us all sorts of mileage for all these Netflix projects. But yeah, I want to know what you all think of Mindhunter potentially getting a 3rd season down in the comments below. Are you as excited about the prospect as we are? I think the answer is going to be yes for the majority of you. And once you've done that, please be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and head back on over to whatculture.com where you can find more sorts of content like this every day, but in the written word. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to, @EwanRuinsThings, and you can follow Josh Brown on Twitter @Josh
Brune with 2 O's on the end.
And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.